Hello, today is Friday, April 24th. Welcome to episode 587 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Morgan Vina. I'm joined today by Advisory Board member Lester Munson, Director of Policy, supposedly, John Lipsey, and Senior Fellow Matt Hayden. In previous Fault Line episodes, we've touched on the impact of the war in Iran and its effect on China, but we haven't really gone into China's involvement in the war itself. Now, China likes to publicly play the role of a neutral actor, even offering to broker ceasefire talks, while at the same time totally backing Iran. The Wall Street Journal pointed out yesterday when it reported that Chinese satellite imagery of the conflict zone has proliferated, offering battlefield guidance to Tehran and other U.S. adversaries. U.S. concerns about this grew after Chinese AI company Mazar Vision claimed to have tracked movements of U.S. F-22 and B-52 bombers. This comes after the Pentagon assessed Chinese satellite firms have participated in business exchanges with the IRGC. The Chinese have also reportedly been helpful to China in other ways as well. According to a report released last month by the Atlantic Council, China has supplied Iran with drones, missiles, and not to mention their components, and aerial and maritime capabilities. So we're going to go ahead and start with Matt here. So as the May summit between President Trump and Xi nears, does China's support for Iran matter? Do we expect Beijing's support for Iran to be on the list of topics to be addressed when the two meet?
I mean, the simple answer is no. The way the president has addressed Chinese aggression and Chinese malfeasance behind the scenes in the past has been, they do it, we just have to be ready to deal with it. This happens with cyber. This happens with illicit trade. The president is focused on getting a level playing field with China directly, and that's going to be the focus of this meeting. The national security implications of their actions across this conflict are likely to be turned to the other executive branch agencies to deal with it. So you're going to see the Department of War and the intelligence community and candidly those in charge of responding to Chinese efforts to just handle it at that level as opposed to leveraging the president to use his bullhorn for that moment. It's likely to be a pure let's level that trade and relationship reset as opposed to anything to touch on these conflict areas.
All right, so Lipsy here. When we think about China conducting surveillance on the United States and potentially imperiling our forces on the ground, does this matter to you?
The leading question, Counselor. Yes, of course it matters to me, Morgan, deeply. But this is sort of president's quip of everybody does it, even the French. Frankly, if it's not a giant balloon sort of making a slow sort of float across the continental United States, I don't, it's hard for me to care too much about it, Morgan. Look, in all seriousness, this is what China is doing in Europe, in the Middle East. This is what they were doing. They're helping the Houthis in their targeting of ships. They're helping the Iranians in this case. And why are they doing this? They're doing this because it's very important to them to keep the Iranian regime afloat and a menace to the United States. That's what's in their interest. The United States taking action to degrade the Iranian regime and the IRGC and their capabilities is certainly not in their interest. But look, the surveillance universe is here to stay. It's only going to increase. It's frankly makes it, for me, pretty remarkable to think about how the United States was able to pull off the sort of surprise attacks in Venezuela and in Iran recently, seemingly without our adversaries having any foreknowledge. It's also probably, one of the factors that contributes to how China is approaching Taiwan and sort of the continuous increasing exercise approach, where it's sort of we're acting in plain sight, and we're creating sort of complacency. And it's not a question of you not seeing what we're doing or what our plans are or what our capabilities are. It's, just it leaves the question of, are we going to act? Are we going to pull the trigger? And shortening that trigger window. But this is also a factor that led into the big fight with Anthropic. Is we have technology that is surveilling all of us, all the things, all the time, and now we have this AI layer that's able to do incredible things in siphoning through all of that information and data in ways that are new and step changes from anything society's had to deal with before. So it's here to stay. It's part of life. We're going to have to find new doctrines to how to operate within this kind of environment.
All right. So, Les, in previous Fault Lines episodes, we have discussed President Trump's relationship with Xi and how he has been soft on China. We've also talked, about China actually being the one that has, apart from Iran, has really sort of suffered from this conflict with Iran, particularly given its dependence on Iranian oil. In this relationship, though, between Trump and Xi, who is daddy?
This is like becoming a pattern, Morgan. Did we talk about daddy on Wednesday?
I think Jessica rightfully admonished you for that, but yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm admonishing you, Morgan. How could you bring up such a elemental concept? That's clearly we have a much more sophisticated approach to geopolitics today, right? Well, a bunch of directions we could go. First of all, I think our president is very much interested in having a successful summit with Xi Jinping in Beijing in May, because he wants to set up another state encounter, a state dinner or such, in Washington before the election. And he wants to stand next to Xi Jinping, and he wants to be taller than him, and he wants to be the guy who is the alpha dog. He wants to be daddy. Yes, you're correct. And in order to do that, we've got to get past this Iran kerfuffle. And I do think at the end of the day, Iran pivots in a way on China. China is, aside from the belligerents here, aside from the US, Israel, and Iran, the country most affected by closing the Strait of Hormuz is China. China's reliant on Middle Eastern energy resources. Its policy towards the Middle East of supporting, folks like the Houthis and Iran is a little bit bananas, if you ask me. That it would be a much smarter long-term play to work with the United States and other countries to isolate Iran and diminish its ability to hold these resources at threat. And I think China knows that. China's in a much weaker spot than it was 5 years ago. Its economy is no longer growing the way it was. There's a ton of economic pressures inside the system. Xi Jinping himself is going for a fourth term next year, which will be unprecedented unless you go back to like Mao Zedong or something. He is purging his own military. He's purging his own political apparatus. There is more stir inside Beijing than we talk about. And so if by putting some pressure on the system here through the conflict with Iran, can Trump make Xi Jinping behave in a way he would otherwise not behave? I think maybe he could. And so I think that's in many ways that this is the big story about the Iran conflict. Will it help change the dynamic between Washington and Beijing to give the U.S. maybe a more permanent position as the alpha dog here?
Yeah, Les, I tend to agree with you. I think Xi is in a far more sort of perilous political position than I think a lot of people realize. Xi, of course, fears his own people and his apparatus more than anyone. And this fourth term is risky there, particularly as China has been weakened in these 5 years or so. Les, I totally agree with you on that point. I do question, maybe this is a topic for a future podcast, but 2027, that hard date is coming up here in about 8 months, 7 months. And so it'll be really telling to see how Xi tries to position himself, particularly in the talks in May and even potentially before the election.
One other thing, Morgan, if you look at this surveillance issue, you see that China has hundreds of satellites. we have thousands of satellites, maybe tens of thousands. I mean, there's a thing we do here in Washington where we totally overestimate our adversary. We did this during the Cold War with the Soviet Union. We thought their economic might was almost on par with ours. It was nowhere near where we were. We can turn a mountain, or we can turn a molehill into a mountain pretty quickly through our system. And so I think folks need to touch grass a little bit on what really is the threat from China to the United States, and realize that, yes, there's an economic competition here, but we're robust across all of the sectors where we're competing with China, and China only has an advantage in a few of them. And so just to kind of level set here, we're in a pretty good spot already, and China knows that. And so that's like kind of the other narrative to watch here, the freak out over some things that maybe we shouldn't be freaking out about.
All right. On that note, that's a wrap. Thanks as always to Grace Trice, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's Fun Friday episode. Join us on Monday, April 27th for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart, fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We are on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.